I'm going to suggest we move on to Lynda, just so Alessandra can catch a little bit of what Lynda will talk about before you have to go as well, and then
Thanks.
We'll make sure we get some, we can have some more discussion afterwards as well. But thanks again, and I'll pass on to Lynda from Scottish Artists Union.
Hi there, everyone. Thanks for inviting us. Just getting our slideshow sorted. Okay, so I wasn't sure how much to go into a bit of background about the union and what we do, because I think some of you will have already heard me outlining all this before, but so I've edited the slides a little bit and tried to adapt them around the basic income kind of focus. So let's move on to the next one. So, we are a trade union, obviously, the Scottish Artists Union. My name's Lynda Graham. I'm the president of the union. I've been president for the last 3 years, and I've been involved in the union on the executive committee for about 10 years. I trained at Glasgow School of Art in textiles, and then I worked for many years in various kind of arts engagement, community arts as it was called then, or socially engaged practice. And then I went freelance about 10 years ago, I think. So that's when I first became involved in the union. So we've got, at the moment, we've got over 2,000 members. So we're mainly visual artists, applied artists and makers. We have associate members, full members and graduate members as well, who are part of the union, who have kind of different voting rights. So we were formally constituted back in 2001. So we're about to celebrate our 21st birthday, which is very exciting. And in 2018, we joined the Scottish Trade Unions Congress, STUC. So that was following, we were, I suppose you could describe us mainly as a servicing union prior to our development review, which we did towards the end of sort of 2017-18. So we did a big kind of review and consultation with the membership to see if they wanted us to develop and go forward, change the kind of structure of the union slightly and become more of a campaigning union. And the vast majority of people supported us to do that. So we changed the structure of the union quite a bit at that point, and we're still very much evolving from there. So our purpose is to improve the professional working lives of visual artists and to make a career in the visual arts sustainable and accessible. So we are led by artists for artists. So we have a voluntary executive committee that leads the union. And as we've grown, we've been joined by more and more paid staff. We're all still part-time. And 3 years ago, we began trialing a part-time paid presidency role for myself. So we're just reviewing that at the moment, because I'm coming to the end of my stint as president. So we're just kind of looking at how that's worked. That started just before the pandemic, so it was influenced by what happened then. So I've kind of summarized our values a little bit, because we've got quite a long sort of statement. So this is kind of a summary of it. So we believe that artists should be valued as the root of creative workers in our communities and in wider society. And that value starts with recognition of artists as creative and highly trained individuals, which a lot of our members are, similar to the other creative unions, very highly trained and qualified. So that experience underpins all arts programs, organizations, infrastructures and activities. So some of the things we campaign and lobby for are industry standard rates of pay to be paid. We renew and update those every year and put them on our website, so our members have got a reference point. So our members use them, and so do more and more. We're finding that organizations are coming to us as well to check that when they organize projects, they are paying the proper rates of pay, which is fantastic. It's something we're trying to sort of think about how we can kind of organize and structure that a little bit better, but it is something that is happening. And we also have done a lot of work recently around the use of what's called under the Fair Work banner, so contracts for freelance employment. We've got 3 template contracts which were drawn up with a lawyer. We launched them last year. So these are all mechanisms which will support a sustainable and meaningful income for artists, and as well as that, into the picture comes basic income, which is something we started looking at kind of prior to the pandemic, and a bit more during the pandemic. So this is a little bit of a profile of our members. We used to run a big sort of annual survey every year. And when the pandemic started, we decided to run sort of lots of smaller surveys to be more sort of flexible and responsive to the sort of, very quickly changing circumstances. So these figures are from 2018. So we're hoping that, well, some of them will have changed and some of them we hope will have improved if we were to do a kind of a larger survey now. But 80% of our members are self-employed, so freelance. 83% earn less than £10,000 a year from their practice. Obviously, a lot of them have supplementary income and jobs to make a realistic living. About 59% have never received public funding. That will have changed because a lot of people received hardship funding during the pandemic from Creative Scotland and other places. But 88% do not get contracts consistently. 61% receive less than industry standard rates of pay. 75% seldom or never receive a fee for exhibitions. I think that's probably about the same. And when we asked them back in 2018, 53% didn't believe that the sector was healthy or viable for their practice. So this is just a little bit about the impact of COVID-19. I won't go into all of the details because I'm sure all of you are aware about the overwhelmingly negative impact that COVID-19 had on our membership. Huge impact on their working lives. It did mean in a sense that people had more time. From a union's perspective, we found that a lot of people contacted us both for support and they wanted to do lots of learning, and we pivoted our learning program, which prior to the pandemic had been largely in person with very little online. And so we were able to reach a lot more of our artists. So that was a positive impact, but as you can see, lots of the impacts were negative. Some interesting research that was done by the STUC in Scotland around the pandemic was looking at the negative impact on two disproportionately affected were hospitality and the creative sector in terms of the impact of the pandemic. So they carried out some research which enabled us to have some stats, because a lot of the time when we go to government and various other sector bodies, they want some hard data and research. So this piece of research was really useful in showing how much the creative sector and the hospitality sector were impacted. And of course, a lot of our members also work in hospitality to supplement their practice. So there was a kind of double whammy there. But that was a good way of being able to focus the politicians' minds on how many artists work in coffee shops and are working in the hospitality sector. So that piece of research gave us some really interesting information and ammunition. This is a piece of artwork from Janie Nicol, who's a former union president, and she's our current campaigns and projects manager. It's just an interesting question. So piece of work that she did a long time ago, looking at wealth, who owns it, how do we distribute it? So this is a piece of work that was going on pre-pandemic. There was a cross-party group at the Scottish Parliament which published a report into Scotland's funding of the arts, which we were all kind of really hoping was going to be a good piece of focus around looking at that whole kind of area and the precarity of artists working in Scotland. And so it was looking at various different funding models, looking at the kind of short-term funding kind of cycle and the constant, having to apply, and the ever shortening sort of span of time that you were given funding for, and how that had an impact as it trickled down from organizations through to artists, adding to the sort of general overall precarity. So when that report was published, one of the recommendations was that the government would take steps to ensure that artists and cultural freelancers were included in the feasibility studies into a basic citizens' income. So this was the first time, I think, that we had really heard it being discussed seriously and considered as a possible tool and approach to the continued sort of precarious nature of funding in Scotland. There was a range of other sort of recommendations as well, which if it's available online if you want to go and have a look. And Joan McAlpine, who was an MSP at the time, she read this out in Parliament. So it was kind of highlighting, the difficulty around sustainability and the reductions in arts and culture funding. So that was a positive step. Seeing Red, this was as the pandemic started, this was a campaign that we had to highlight the precarity that artists were facing, not just obviously during the pandemic, when it had kind of reached a sort of obviously very crucial sort of point, but also before that. So we used that approach to sort of lobby and campaign, and the kind of discussing more approaches and tools, including basic income, was part of that. So that was when this was one of the kind of mini surveys that we did, was to ask our membership about basic income. So this is, we didn't get a huge, in terms of our proportion of our membership, you can see the numbers at the bottom there. It was quite hard to get people to reply to, because there was a lot going on, wasn't there, in the pandemic. So, but we did feel that the responses that we got were significant enough to use the data. So one of the questions was, if such a payment was available in Scotland, would you support its implementation? And a lot of people fed back to us that they did want to support a basic income just for artists. They wanted to support it for the whole of society, which was quite an interesting, that people were supporting that. So you can see there the overwhelming support for its implementation. So these were the key findings in the survey. So 92% of the membership supported implementation of a universal basic income in Scotland. So that's not just for artists, but for everybody. So over 90% believed that UBI at the suggested rate of £215 per week would impact on their practice a great deal, and only 2% felt it would not impact at all. Sorry, I can only see a bit of my slides. I can't see the end of them because everyone's faces are down the side, sorry. So I'm missing a bit on the slides there. So we asked people sort of what the immediate impact of this level of UBI would have on their life circumstances, their art practice, what would they do with that, and what would the long-term impact be. And finally, we found that over 94% of respondents would support the union campaigning for UBI, with only 6% not sure. Or they wanted, some people wanted to find out more information, and we did run some sessions online to support people to learn and explore the pros and potential cons of UBI, and or a basic, a targeted basic income for artists. So the next few slides are some quotes from people, which give you a kind of flavor of the kind of things that it allowed people to sort of think about. What would it be like? What kind of impact would it have on my life? A lot of people obviously talked about not having to have an extra job, stress, mental health. This person saying, I often think of quitting my art career, find it difficult to work and pay for childcare as a single parent. So there's access issues there, equalities issues. Fundamentally, it allows this person to continue with their art practice and remove anxiety. We got, there's so many, I think we got, for this survey, we got more descriptive sort of narratives, quite long. It gave people a chance to really sort of imagine what my life would be like, and really talk about what the difficulties of balancing trying to continue their art practice with the rest of their life. We weren't, I think we got about 50 or 60, quite in-depth comments from people. So this is just a selection really of them. So this is somebody talking about if UBI had been available when they graduated, just how much they feel they would have pursued, they've been able to progress their career. Just on that, going through these kind of vital years as you come out of your training, and how, so that's quite interesting. And this is somebody with a disability that talks about how she feel it would, improve access for them, and how much, it's good for artists, good for Scotland, not just good for the individual involved. Another one, I wouldn't have to work an extra job. Stress of not having enough money affects my mental and physical health. Oh, that might be a summary of the last one, sorry. Or the first one. So this is somebody who's got, because something that affects a lot of our members is that they have multiple income streams, and balancing all those streams of income is what can make it quite stressful. I know that from having done it myself, especially when you work in communities. I used to do quite a lot of work, and they would quite often change the timeline at the last minute. So you would suddenly find yourself, maybe you thought you'd have to balance 4 projects in a week, and when you thought you might just have 2, which is very stressful. So this person talks about the precarity of short-term contracts, no guarantees, no predictability. This person's, reflect on the fact that they do have some sort of income, so they're quite lucky. Financial security, support family life better, reduce stress, contribute to a better planned and more speculative and ambitious creative practice. So yeah, other people talked about being able to sort of sit back and think about their work more, rather than, constantly sort of being sort of time poor. So we, at our AGM in 2020, we put this motion in to the meeting and to the members, and this is the motion that was passed. So we've been continuing to campaign and explore what basic income could mean for our members, how we lobby for it at Parliament, how we liaise with the other trade unions, because that's been an interesting journey, because largely when we started looking at basic income, a lot of the other unions were very not supportive of our even our kind of wish to explore it and to discuss it. We struggled to find people who were open to doing that, but that's changed quite a bit, so that's quite interesting. So this is kind of where we are at the moment. So we've made links with a relatively new artist union in Ireland called Praxis. And, people here have referenced how the pilot scheme there has started. So Praxis have got a really interesting sort of paper that they've published, which looks at obviously the pros of basic income for that pilot, or proposed pilot at that stage. But also it's really interesting how it looks at the potential pitfalls as well, some of which we've thought about. So it's really worth reading. We're just starting to try and pick up on our links to Artists Union England and looking at joint campaigning and how we might do that. There's a working group at the moment at the Scottish Parliament on what's called MIG, or Minimum Income Guarantee. I don't sit on that group. It's not something I know an awful lot about. I've got some notes here if people want to know what MIG is. I can read it out. It seems to me it's more targeted at people on the, much nearer the sort of the poverty levels or sub-poverty levels than the UBI, doesn't have the universal element. So that working group, I think it's met twice, and we've recently been approached by somebody who is involved in the STUC to start a working group amongst the trade unions, because more of us have started to talk about it in Scotland. So that group was due to meet this week, but it's been postponed until May. And I've just recently found out that there's a motion has been put to the STUC Congress next week. I think it's in support of MIG, but I'll have to come back to you when I clarify that, because I haven't had a chance to read through all the motions that are going into Congress. So that has been put forward by the Actors Trade Union Equity. I think that's quite an interesting development. What's my next slide? Oh yeah, this is just our new sticker logo, because we're celebrating 21 years. So I thought I'd put that there. I think that's me. I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks, Lynda. Really excellent. Shame that Alessandra had to leave just 2 minutes before the end there, because obviously loads of like really good crossover, and as you say, 21 years worth of work there that kind of loads of people can find really inspiring. And I think this kind of detail that you've gone into, looking at both basic income from an artist perspective, but for artists thinking about UBI, and then also mention this minimum income guarantee take on it, I think is really showing that you're sort of exploring the texture of it in the place that you're in, which I think is what is really useful for this group as well, to kind of actually put some experience and some specificity on sort of conversations about basic income that can sometimes be a bit abstract. So I really appreciate it. Again, I mean, just quite happy to open it up for any questions or comments from who we have gathered. Go for it, Martin.
Thanks for the presentation, Lynda. I was just wondering if you think, just that last slide about minimum income guarantee and the working group being set up, if you think that's almost, the inevitable kind of stepping stone before you perhaps get to UBI, and that's where we'll end up first, rather than a UBI, despite the pilots in Wales, pilots in Ireland and other places. It seems to be more acceptable to people who are maybe sceptical about it.
Yeah, potentially. Well, of course, at the moment, the Scottish Government doesn't have the levers of power to implement a basic income in Scotland, although it could potentially support a small sort of mini pilot, because those kind of things have been done before. But yeah, I think it's only recently, the MIG group's only recently come onto our radar. We didn't know about it before. It's only because this person at the STUC, who's an equalities officer, I think, has been involved. And then more of us, because we're part of the other cultural unions that are affiliated to the STUC, have been meeting throughout the pandemic more regularly. When I was first involved in the union, I think we met like once or twice a year. And so there wasn't that kind of dialogue or that around different approaches. And what the thinking was about any sort of levers like MIG or UBI, and a discussion sort of, place to discuss these things. But because we've been meeting more regularly, there's more dialogue. And so that's how we kind of found out about MIG. So yeah, as I say, I don't really know an awful lot about the detail of it, but looking at what I've read, it would seem like, yes, it could, maybe it makes the idea more palatable. I suppose the difficulty for us is that we want our members to get professional rates of pay and a level of income that is comparable to other professionals. So most of the people looking at that are on the MIG steering group are from Poverty Alliance and those welfare groups, and people really on the breadline. So we're kind of coming at it from a sort of slightly different approach, although we would support that for those groups, of course, but we're looking at people having professional recognition and professional levels of pay for the work that they do. So it's a slightly different focus, but yeah, I think you're maybe right. And I think certainly that, people are listening and open to ideas in a way that they weren't before. So that's good.
I'm just wondering, Lynda, like whether, you mentioned sort of like, certainly since I think it was 2018, that last survey was done, was it the kind of the ones with some quite shocking statistics on it about sort of 70% of people having less than 10 grand, well, no, 83% less than 10 grand a year from their practice, and 88% with no contracts. So there's the lobbying that the union that you've done is probably, yeah, as you say, it'd be great to be able to see what the effect of that is. But just more anecdotally, do you think there's a kind of an acceptance of artists as valid workers in Scotland, in comparison to sort of like, I don't know if you could compare it to England or what it was like in Scotland? I'm just thinking the kind of what the effect of, you know, places like Glasgow being and the art school being such, you know, a central part of the narrative of that city, has that had a positive impact over sort of your time there, or have you seen a change in that way?
I'd have to say, actually, I think it's maybe harder now. It's make a living. I really, it makes me feel sad to say that. You know, I graduated from art school in the 80s, and it's really changed significantly. There are less. I worked in kind of arts development, you know, social engaged practice, and there are vastly fewer jobs in that area. If you know, some people might have before combined that kind of role that was more a secure part-time job with a local authority. You know, all the arts development workers in the local authorities have been hollowed out. They got rid of the cultural coordinators in Scotland. That not only gave stable jobs to a whole raft of people some of whom came out of art colleges, but it also, when I was a cultural coordinator in the City of Edinburgh, we, you know, regularly employed 10, 15, 20 artists a week right across in all the schools right across Edinburgh. So, you know, that gave people regular employment, and that's some local authorities still have them, but it's, you know, comparison to what it was like. So I just think it's becoming harder and harder, and maybe that's why people are more open to thinking about something like basic income. I think what has happened a bit sometimes when you're speaking to politicians, and they've been more open to listening to those kind of income levels. And I think a couple of people said to us kind of off the record, how do artists survive on that level of income? They think almost like you're making it up. And, you know, I suppose you say to them, well, that's from their practice. So it's maybe from selling their work or doing work which they can connect their training and their practice to doing. But they're not able to survive just on that. You know, some people are lucky enough to have a partner who, you know, helps them to smooth out the sort of peaks and troughs of their income. But that's an equalities issue for me, because that's not really acceptable, that they have to, you know, have a job, a supplementary job somewhere else. And I genuinely think some of the politicians have at least started to be aware of how difficult that is. And we also talked, because quite a few people who were pretty big names in Scotland who were members, and some who were not members, came to us at the beginning of the pandemic and said to us that they were struggling. So they don't want to be identified because it's embarrassing. They've got a brilliant CV and they've probably exhibited in some quite high profile places in Scotland, but it's embarrassing for them to sort of say, you know, actually we're struggling. Some people sent us their bank statements to prove it. You know, they were like, and it was really tough for us at the beginning of the pandemic because we didn't have a hardship fund. We don't have that level of, because we keep our membership fees pretty low in comparison to the other creative unions, because we recognize people's income levels. You know, it's not like maybe Equity or the Musicians Union's got a range of members, you know, from people who are just starting out to more successful musicians that can afford to give more money. So we do, you know, we try and keep our fees as reasonable as we can. But yeah, that was certainly something that we've tried to communicate to the politicians and I think the people in Creative Scotland and these kind of bodies are aware of that, but maybe other people not so much, because on the surface it all looks very productive and very professional, but behind that there's a level of precarity and unacceptable and exclusive. It's becoming more exclusive because if you don't have a lot of resources, both in your family, you know, thinking about pursuing a creative and artistic career is, I think, becoming more of a challenge.
No, that's really excellent response, Lynda. Thanks, and like lots of, you know, good detail on it as well, but also slightly depressing. But I think I know what you're saying about this sort of well, again, yeah, the reality, the kind of like the public secret is that actually no one is really, you know, sort of making this work, even though kind of cities or countries will use culture as a way of sort of showing how they're thriving. Yeah, and I think Janie, it's Janie, isn't it? Nichols' work, you know, was useful. I think when she presented about, you know, thinking about this iceberg economics and kind of
and the free labor that keeps
yes, exactly,
the free labor that keeps the sector going, because people are so enthusiastic and dedicated and such hard workers, you know. So
which I think the interesting conversation we had around that, and it's something I think we'll continue to pick up on in these basic income sort of sessions, is what if you were to harness that type of enthusiasm and labor and passion that people have towards something else, which I feel like, yeah, within this AWI and the union, you've got a sense of that. It's kind of like, yeah, there is this whatever we'd like to call it, resilience or like willingness to thrive, but yeah, how can we sort of create something solid out of that rather than sort of, yeah, continuing to sort of, yeah, live a bit of a public secret. I wanted to mention there's a really nice book that's just come out by Cuba Schroeder, who's written this ABC of the Projectariat, which I don't know if you'll have come across, but I'll maybe put a link to it in the chat, or see if you can come along to talk about it in a next kind of edition, because I think actually what we're getting onto with the way that you were talking about it, and Alessandra, is the emotional condition of being an art worker, and kind of the, you know, the fact that there's a lot there that, yeah, not just the precariousness and the anxiety, but the kind of demand to be working on, yeah, this short-term sort of contracts, the kind of the invisible labor of networking, and kind of, you know, what are the actual resources that we have. I think he's really looking at it in an interesting way, so maybe I'll put a link to what he's doing in there. But yeah, anyone else to yeah, go on, Toby.
Yeah, no, I think it's just not wanting to pour more doom and gloom on the thing, but it's just, yeah, it's interesting how you were saying that so many people are highly trained and also highly educated, and it's, I guess it's that whole thing about yeah, that's those skills just not being valued in the labor market in the same way. And that I mean, it was just, when you were responding to Andy's first point, just made me think about how the government are thinking about restricting the amount of is it, you know, the amount of people who can apply for arts degrees now. It's kind of, that's the new thing they're kind of bringing in. You know, they've been making a correlation with like, oh well, you graduate, you're not actually going to earn that much money, so we're not going to see the return on that investment in you. So we're going to diminish the possibilities of people getting arts educations. But then also that whole thing about which I guess is the incredibly depressing when you think about how creativity is seen as the, you know, the number one thing for the jobs of the future. But I'm just thinking as well in that terms of just, you know, the skills and education which people have got, and if they're going to try and go out and make, you know, for a lot of people I know who are artists, you know, you've made it if you get a teaching job at the university, but you know, to get that now you have to have a PhD, and then it's that kind of like, it's just making it, squeezing it, and also, you know, that, I mean, I'm just about to finish my PhD, so I'm not going to, like, you know, demean the artists who have got PhDs, but I know that it does, you know, it's not for everyone. If you have, you know, a whole teaching body who are just artists of PhDs, you get a particular kind of academic PhD or artist. And I mean, I'm just about to have my Viva, and I was just talking to some friends of mine who graduated as undergraduates from the same university, and they sort of said, oh yeah, such and such, who's been a teaching member of the staff for years and years and years. They're like, do they have a PhD? And it's just like, I don't think any of like the old school staff have got PhDs, and it's, you know, just a very different sort of system there. I know I'm going off on one there, but I wanted to ask you about the Seeing Red policy, because is that, or the paper, is that something which Scottish Artists Union have done? Because it just made me think of the Future Generations commissioner in Wales, that you know, the kind of the manifesto they produced, which calls for a trial of basic income, but also a shorter working week. But they've also got a policy in there for, I think it's a cultural participation income, and I guess they sort of write that in as kind of acknowledging that creativity and artists particularly are, you know, that kind of angle is needed in creating policies for the future and developing that, you know, how we sort of move out of, you know, I think it was written before the pandemic, but it's definitely made an impact during that. And I'm not sure what their status is. I think it's maybe a government funded, but I think it is a think tank, so it's not actually writing policy. And I was wondering if, yeah, the Seeing Red policy or the paper, whether that was something you've just written yourselves, or is that of a wider thing?
No, it was just a title for our campaign at the beginning of the pandemic, really. We just did it as, and we had a list of issues that were there for artists. And I suppose because it was during the pandemic, it was about focusing on emergency funding, really. And yeah, but it's something that we've talked about in terms of something like, you know, the Artists Union England has done this kind of charter mark, or, you know, a charter for good practice. So we do have a manifesto that's historical, and we share that with two organisations in Scotland called SCAN and Engage Scotland. So SCAN is Scottish Contemporary Arts Network, and Engage Scotland works in sort of engaged sort of settings. It's kind of a membership organisation as well as SCAN. So the manifesto, I think it had about 15 points, which was like, I suppose, like broad values across the arts rather than specific tools and, you know, ideas, a sort of staging post about how you would get there. It was kind of a broad shared manifesto. And we're recently looking at updating that to sort of refresh and review it and see, you know, how we can all sort of share it as a sort of tool for future development. I think it's just during the pandemic, it's just been so much of the last 2 years has been not firefighting, but, you know, a lot of kind of approaches to ensuring that artists were as well supported as they could be, you know, and keeping us going as a union during that time, because we have a learning program which we had to apply for new funding for during the pandemic and shift everything online, go digitally. So, but I mean, I think certainly something that we could share across other organisations, you know, could be something to explore, to strengthen it. You know, you can see in the past, some of the members of our committee have been involved more closely with the European artists organisations, looking at artists' resale rights and areas like that. And so that, you know, there's a whole kind of other area that we've never touched on, things like artists' pensions. We've done a little bit of work trying to link up with DAX recently, because we've been getting more and more inquiries about copyright and IP and areas like that. But, you know, we've just, I suppose it's just the very bones of keeping the union going and providing the services that we do takes a huge amount of energy. And you've got to try and balance that. Because when you've got members, because obviously we provide the basic services that people join for, as well as the campaigning elements like insurance, legal advice. We run a sort of members query responses as well. And just kind of keeping all those things going. And keeping people involved, you know, because we are artist led, so we're looking at various mechanisms to ensure that people can have a route into being involved in the union in a sort of more collective way. So partly we've tried to do that through the learning program, and we're also piloting a rep structure at the moment. So we haven't had one up till now because, you know, we can't just suddenly transfer the traditional trade union model of reps into our kind of working patterns. So at the moment we're looking at what kind of training do people need, how is that going to work, to kind of strengthen the collective sort of aspect and ensure that we're really connected to the members, and, you know, they're out there in their particular workplace, whether they're in the Highlands and Islands or here in Edinburgh. And sort of, yeah, diversify a little bit. So yeah, there's just so much to do. There's just not enough hours in the day, really. So many challenges.
Yeah, thanks, Lynda. I mean, I kind of feel like, yeah, that also came up a little bit with Alessandra's, didn't it? This idea of them having this decentralized model and sort of starting to kind of find, so you can have the unions, but also I think artists in general also just, finding the conditions of their labor a much more interesting kind of subject than they once did. So there's a movement towards that, isn't there? I'm going to suggest that we kind of wrap up at that. I think that's kind of feels like a good sort of point to end. We've had a good conversation about both things and some ideas for future kind of presentations or ways to pick up on this. I'm really keen to get someone in, like an artist who lives in a country where they just get really, really well looked after. So I'm going to see if we can get someone from Norway or something to come and just tell us how brilliant it is getting, or like tons of funding as soon as you come out of graduate for the next one, and we'll see where how that sort of opens up the discussion as well. But yeah, thanks very much, Lynda, and thanks to Alessandra who's had to leave early, but we'll obviously hopefully see her again at a future session. And thanks very much for everyone else who's come along, and for Toby for sorting it out. Anything you'd like to add, Toby, as a sign off?
Just to echo what you've just said, Andy. Thanks, Lynda, and thanks everyone else for coming along. It's been really great to see everyone, and please get in touch if there's any similar projects or things which you think should be discussed in this forum in any future sessions.
I suppose the obvious suggestion would be somebody that gets onto the pilot in Ireland, or somebody from Praxis that can talk about how that process is going, because they've just opened up their applications.
That's a great idea. Yeah, we'll do that. Nice one. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your
thank you. Thanks for organizing.
Bye. Bye.
Take care. Bye. Nice one. Nope, thought that was good, Toby. Nice one. I can hear my tea getting ready, which is why I was wrapping up a bit early. I can hear the oven getting opened. I was like, I think it's going to finish a bit earlier today because we only got 2 presentations. But that is a good conversation to be having with Lynda, and it was nice that she like her and Alessandra both come in with the stats and the facts, which I think is useful sometimes, isn't it? But yeah, I think I will ask someone like maybe even just like Luke Drozd, who's just an artist who's moved from the UK, now he's in Norway and he's getting bits of funding, and it's just like I think we could do with kind of bringing it back into a bit of a it's good to be talking about the artist conditions, but also about sorts of the other sorts of work, and there's 2 Irish artists that are on this next residency that I'm running, so I'm sure there'll definitely be some way of finding someone who's either a recipient or very close to it.
Right, okay.
Unless, is there anyone that you've got in mind, or
I guess, I mean, there is I mean, it might not be, I mean, I guess if you already know Luke, that might be, and also the nice thing about that as well is it's like, what's his experience of being an art, someone who's lived in, in the UK or grown up here and had these conditions, and now is experiencing the other side. But I have, when I was in Oslo for the Norwegian or like the Nordic BN conference, like I think one of the main guys from that was an artist, or was represented as an artist or whatever, but I think he might be more like film and like game kind of aspect of it, which again might
the guy who ran the workshop for the BN, I can't remember what his name was, who did the interactive fiction workshop thing. No,
I don't think it was him. It was like actually someone from, I mean, possibly, but I'll double check, because but yeah, he seemed nice, and also like but there was someone else I met there who I think I can't remember exactly where she was from, but yeah, she ran like a studio space type thing in Oslo as well.
Well, let's have a scratch and have a think about it and see who could sort of come in, but it's not until when would be the next one be? Is it August? So I don't know after
that. Sort of June or I guess if we're doing quarterly, I guess we've done. It'd be like
July is the next one that I've got in my July the 6th, which is James's birthday. I probably won't do it on that one. Although even Luke are actually coming coming that weekend, so could do it in person from our house if we did it that night. Anyway, we'll work it out. But yeah, I kind of feel like we're sort of, I mean, each time I'm thinking, oh right, you know, they're really useful conversations to be having for us.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of like, I'm a bit sort of I don't know, yeah. Is it worth? Yeah, no, it is worth doing it. But I just mean like for there just being sort of like 2 or 3 guests at it, it does sometimes feel a bit sort of like, okay, what's the sort of like appetite for this? When I think, you know, in theory, what we're talking about and the people, there should be like a lot of people at it because it's quite sort of current. So maybe we need to have a little think on the marketing side of it, or kind of where the support's coming from. I don't know how many like people are coming along to other lab network meetups and stuff, so it might be good to get some tips from them.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it probably is just like, you know, Zoom fatigue now, isn't it? I think like people are kind of thing. But I mean, one thing is that like Martin, who was in the meeting tonight, is someone I've met through the arts union work, and he's in the working group with me.
Yeah,
we had a meeting with Lynda maybe a few weeks ago about like, yeah, how we can, like, the 2 unions could collaborate and stuff, and I'm working on trying to finish off this, like, you know, or they suggested turning what I was working on into like a pamphlet for, like, you know, the union, just an explainer of what basic income is and why artists would want to do it. And we're hoping to do a couple of like in-person workshops, just like, you know, at Newbridge Studios in Newcastle, and then if that works, sort of go some other places. But once we've done a couple of them, then it might be something that they would advertise to the union members, and then that might be a way of like making it specific, but also having it just being it's a specific sort of purpose for it, kind of thing.
Nice. Yeah, no, that's it. Well, yeah, and we could end up doing something in person, couldn't we? But yeah. Okay, nice one, Toby. Well, yeah, hope you've had your mock 5, haven't you? I'm sure I'll speak to you before you have your real thing in May. But yeah, if not, you know, good luck and have a good Easter weekend.
You too. Yeah, thanks a lot. All right, enjoy your tea. I'll see you later.
See you later. Bye.